Well, certainly quite a very seminal point as South Africa is still reflecting on the important role it should play when it comes to the human rights. So reflecting on a 30-year journey, and today's focal point has to be around human rights, but also factoring in international human rights as well, especially as we know that South Africa will have a Human Rights Day. Joining us now is a man who has been really at the heart of discussions here, the DG of the Department of Justice, DG Mashabane. Thank you so much indeed, sir, for your time. Sir, it's a last mile today and a great deal in terms of the international law, but also South Africa's foreign policy when it comes to the human rights. I mean, we've seen you've been at the ICJ, talking about the atrocities in Gaza, but in a nutshell, tell us about the importance of today.
Look, thank you very much and good morning to your viewers. Today, is the last day of the conference, but a major focus of today will be South Africa's foreign policy and the place of human rights in South Africa's foreign policy. So that will be the discussion, and we have, people from academia who will participate in the discussions, but also former South African ambassadors who have served as South Africa's foreign policy practitioners over the past 3 decades. And part of what we'll look at later in the day as well will be, the African human rights system and its impact on the domestic programs and policies. And further, and which will be the last discussion, by the way, we'll be looking at international human rights law and the right to self-determination, and look at the specific cases of the Western Sahara as well as the Palestinian question.
And those are very critical subject matters, because when you look at South Africa's foreign policy, at least since 1994, the issue of the self-determination of the Palestinians and the current situation in Western Sahara, the country's been clear, whether you're looking at the UN General Assembly in terms of the voting patterns. I would imagine that you'll be getting more in terms of also just the journey of South Africa's role in the continent. For example, looking at South Africa being a first country, having a same-sex laws and stuff like that. So I would imagine it's quite a very critical point today.
It is. First starting, President Mandela's time in terms of South Africa's foreign policy, he made this point that human rights shall be the centerpiece of our foreign policy. And obviously, based on the history and the experiences of South Africans pre-1994, that gross violation of the majority, of the human rights of the majority was the order of the day. So the commitment of the country in terms of its posture and its relationship with foreign nations is to make sure that there is respect for human rights. As you have mentioned, of course, in the continent, there are these challenges. We have this expression insofar as equality is concerned in our Bill of Rights, that you will not discriminate against anyone on the basis of sexual orientation or any other ground, and it remains a challenge globally. So South Africa has been at the forefront even in terms of that question, to fight against discrimination, not only just racial discrimination, but discrimination on any other ground that is prohibited by international law and our constitution. And of course, the question of Western Sahara and Palestine is a serious question of self-determination and gross violation of international human rights. Hence, it is very important that today, as we close the conference, we focus on South Africa's role. You mentioned the General Assembly and the multilateral processes. South Africa has generally been at the forefront over the past 30 years in terms of, being at the forefront and being a vanguard for human rights and protection of human rights of the oppressed and the downtrodden. You'll recall that in 2001, South Africa hosted the UN World Conference against racism, xenophobia, and other intolerances. And from that conference, a program of action called Durban Declaration and Platform of Action was adopted, and program of action was adopted. And since then, South Africa has been at the forefront of championing that program insofar as global racism is concerned.
And just before I let you go, DG, also a very important time globally with the marking of the International Day for anti-discrimination in terms of the elimination of all forms of discrimination. A day inspired by the events in Sharpeville. So once again, really just pointing to the role where South Africa has always been very much fundamental in terms of crafting these global instrument against all forms of discriminations.
Look, indeed, remember, generally as a country, the people of this country, our forefathers, waged a struggle for freedom. But to a certain extent as well, South Africa is a byproduct of international solidarity. And that's why after Sharpeville in 1960, the UN decided to declare Sharpeville Day an international day against racial discrimination. So tomorrow, as we mark, Sharpeville Day, celebrate it as Human Rights Day here in South Africa, globally, the UN will be leading celebrations of that day as an international day against racial discrimination. And when you have such an honor as a country, have the UN and the global community identify one of your days to give you that solidarity, it just then gives you, the obligation, the moral obligation as well, to play a central role in global affairs, even in leading efforts against all forms of gross violation of human rights. Hence, you'll see South Africa doesn't keep quiet when there's violation of human rights, particularly the right to determination, self-determination in Western Sahara and in Palestine.
All right, DG, thank you so much indeed for your time. So he's responsible for the Department of Justice, but really fleshing out the significance of this particular gathering. A lot of focus today is around the global issues, but also tying that in with the human rights, but also focusing really on a number of challenges. As you also know that in the African continent, you have quite a number of hotspots where the human right violation really is a big concern in places like Sudan and many others as well. So there's going to be a great deal of really a lot of attention being paid to that. Khalihle Khumalo, SABC News, Boksburg.